Welcome to Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda. In a previous Take 5, we talked about the sons of Korah, the descendants of a guy whose name was a byword for rebellion and treachery in Israel, and yet his descendants ended up writing some of the most beautiful psalms that we have in the Old Testament today. Now, one of the sons of Korah was a guy called Hanan, and he was a grandson of the prophet Samuel, and he was a worship leader. Now, worship leaders are not a modern innovation. Worship leaders have been around longer than pastors have. Before there was even a church with pastors in it, there were worship leaders leading worship in the tabernacle, and then after Solomon built the temple, leading worship in the temple. So sometimes when people think of worship leaders as being some kind of new innovation, they're really missing the biblical history of it all. But alongside Heman, there was another guy whose name was Asaph. In 1 Chronicles chapter 6, verse 39, it says, "And Heman's associate Asaph, who served at his right hand." And that would mean serving at his right hand would mean that he was his associate, would be that he was his assistant. It's like when somebody is called an associate pastor, it simply means they're an assistant pastor. And Asaph, who served at the right hand of Heman, developed into a powerful worship leader and a songwriter and a prophet. He wrote a number of psalms, and his psalms would be later sung in Hezekiah's day. 2 Chronicles chapter 29 verse 30 says that Hezekiah set up in the temple for the people to sing the Psalms of David and the Psalms of Asaph. And we find 12 of Asaph's Psalms in our book of Psalms in the Old Testament. Now, one thing is he's described in 2 Chronicles 29:30, when it says his Psalms were sung alongside those of David, it says that he was described as Asaph the seer, the prophet. And the reason for that was because Hezekiah's day was a day whenever the nation of Judah was in decline, and they were really about to tip over past the point of no return, where the kingdom would collapse and the Babylonians would come and carry the people off into captivity. And at that time, yes, they needed songs of praise, but they also needed words of prophecy. And Asaph's Psalms, many of them were written in times of great danger and trouble. You can see that in the words of them. They're crying out to God for deliverance in times of trouble and great difficulty, and when people don't know where to turn. And they rehearse God's past miracles. They say, "Lord, do it again like you did in the days of old." And then also they actually prophesy. And they prophesy not nice prophecies, not the kind of prophecies where God says he loves you and he blesses you, but the kind of prophecies where condemning Israel's enemies, condemning those that oppressed Israel, and saying that God would judge them for their oppression of the people of God. And so at a time whenever, in Hezekiah's day, whenever the people were hard pressed, they turned to the Psalms of Asaph as well as to the Psalms of David in order to remind themselves that they might be hard pressed and tough times may be ahead. Like the song says, there may be trouble ahead. But they had songs that said at the end of that, God was going to bring them out of their trouble, and God was going to vindicate them against all the attacks of their enemies. So Asaph started off as an assistant he was an assistant worship leader. He ended up becoming a worship leader. He ended up becoming a songwriter. He ended up becoming a prophet. Sometimes being an assistant to somebody else is not an easy thing to do. We want to step out on our own. We want to be our own boss. And when we're assisting somebody else, and when we're supporting somebody else in ministry and submitting to their leadership and their authority, that can be a very tough thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do. I know I've been an assistant pastor for years, and I know what that feels like. But I tell you what, when we are faithful in that which God gives us to do, which might include supporting and assisting somebody else, God will open doors for greater things in our lives. He did it for Asaph. He was a faithful associate at the right hand of Heman, and he became a worship leader in his own right, and he became a songwriter, and he became a prophet whose psalms were sung alongside those of King David. May God take you today. May you, as you're faithful in the place where the Lord has placed you today, may he open fresh doors of opportunity ahead for you in Jesus' name. God bless you. Join us again next time for another Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda.